Hi everybody, Jim Ostrowski with the first edition Liberty Moving podcast for the year, and it's a big one. Hold on a second, I gotta get my heated gloves on. Sorry about that. Haven't quite figured out how to do this with one person. So there we go. You just gotta grab my notes at some point, but. Yeah, Happy New Year. Every year we release the GOP Scorecard, so this is what we're doing today. It's a nice snowy day in Buffalo. Should be fun. Stick with it. Starting a little slow. So let me back up and just talk about this GOP Scorecard, and then we'll announce it. It's an actual chart. I posted a draft, but we'll post it up everywhere. I'm hoping this is my biggest podcast since I started doing these, so I took the liberty of shaving this morning. Put my Oxford hat on, matches my jacket. So GOP scorecard. Why do we have a GOP scorecard? Well, the question is why didn't we have a GOP scorecard? This party has existed. I thought it was 1856. Because that's the date of their first platform, or the platform that I've read. But it was actually 1854. So this party's existed since 1854, and it's never really had a metric to evaluate the party. You got all these think tanks in Washington and outside of Washington and all over the fucking place. Why haven't they done this? So, I'm a stat guy. I just put out a book exposing the two big lies of the gun control movement, which all I did was come up with a stat that ranks every country in the world by their level of violence. No sweat, all in a day's work. That book's on Amazon, by the way. And years ago, I'm a sports stat guy. I've developed 3 sports statistics in various stages of development. One of them I actually tried to market, but couldn't get any interest. One was just a hobby, but one of them was I would rank the offensive linemen on the Buffalo Bills just as kind of a hobby. I came up with a little system. So I'm thinking, we rank, batting average, sports athletes. We have a quarterback ranking. I had my offensive line ranking, but we don't rank congressmen. We don't rate them. I mean, how many statisticians are there in the country? We're talking about H-1B visas. How many I don't even have a statistics degree. I never even took a class in statistics. And it's up to me, little old me, broken down old country lawyer from Buffalo, New York, to come up with a system? Well, I did. I did come up with a system. Now, I've been criticizing the Republican Party. Let's shoot forward in time. I've been criticizing the Republican Party as a big government party since 1980. That's 44 years. 1980. And I've explained it. I've proved it. I've done the documentation in many books and articles. But what I didn't have was a metric. And I said, well, let's come up with a metric. And so when the Republicans, I think they took the House in 2-2, if I'm not mistaken. I should have checked that. But McCarthy got in there as speaker in 23, and they controlled the House. So I said, you know what? They control the House. The House is a very powerful institution. Let's see how they do. So I said, 2 years ago today, I said I'm gonna come up with a system. I posted on it, but I couldn't do the ranking because I had to wait a year. So last year I did the ranking, and the base score was 100 at the beginning of the year. And at the end of the year, the size of the government was 101. In other words, the government got 1% bigger under the Republicans. Now, you could say, well, they were stuck with prior budgets and this and that, and inertia and all this stuff, and they didn't really get a chance to see what they could do. So then but now we have a new year. And they were in control of everything, pretty much. Not everything. It's tough to get rid of so-called, mandatory spending. But there's a tremendous amount of discretionary spending, and the House has a tremendous amount of power. Obviously, you all know from your high school civics class that all spending bills must arise in the House, which means not a dollar is spent unless it gets by. In other words, you can, if you have a tie vote in the House, you defeat any spending except so-called mandatory spending. That's not mandatory. That's bullshit. That's another podcast. I already did that podcast. So the House has a tremendous amount of power. So just checking to make sure I got my notes. So I think it is fair now. They've had 2 years. They controlled the House all of 2024. I got a lot of traffic here. Hold on a second. And let's see how they did. So I'm going to risk my life and cross. Let's see if I survive. A guy is speeding. You're going too fast, MFer. Okay, got by. So let's talk about the ranking system, because you say, well, you know, is your ranking system any good? Well, I think it's pretty good. It's based on, so if you're going to have a formula, you've got to have publicly available data so people can check your work. And by the way, if I made any errors, hey, feel free to correct me. I'm just one guy. It's like I'm not a think tank in Washington. I don't have billions of dollars, millions of dollars. I got dozens of dollars. I just did this with old-fashioned grit, subsidized by my own bank account. So you got to be able to check the work. The formula should take into account taxes, inflation, regulation. Actually, there's only 6 things government does, and my formula does, directly or indirectly, tend to take into account all 6. That's taxation, regulation, inflation, conscription, eminent domain, and war. It does take them all into account. So what are the 5 factors? There's 5 factors. Each is worth 20 points, and they add up to 100. So you have, at the beginning of the year, your score is 100, and then you take the score at the end of the year, and you know, did government get bigger? This is federal government only. Did government get bigger or not? So what are the 5 factors? Let's grab my chart here. I don't need to look at the chart for this, but what are the 5 factors? Spending, obviously, is huge. See, Republicans, let's let the cat out of the bag. The GOP is a fraud scheme. MAG is different. We'll talk about that later. Republicans, politicians like to talk about tax cuts. No, the actual tax rate is what the government spends. So fuck all that tax bullshit. That's a con job by people who are lying to you so they can have power over you and spend your money. They're liars. So we take into account spending. We take into account debt. Now, not the overall debt, because that's a bit of a con job. Oh, I still have my notes. Sorry, panicking a little bit. We factor in debt held by the public. In other words, the debt that the government owes itself. Who the fuck cares? I don't care. It's the debt held by the public. In other words, the debt that the money the government has to pay back to private individuals or other governments that quote public. That's worth 20%. We take into account the number of government employees, because regulations are hard to measure, but regulators have to, you have to have government employees to regulate. We take into account government employees. We take into account, I'm already forgetting one of them, we take into account, the number of federal agencies. Again, that's sort of an indirect way of measuring regulation, because if you're not cutting agencies, you're not cutting regulations except around the margins, and who cares about that? That's bullshit. And then we take into account active duty troops overseas, because this is a country that hasn't been invaded by an army bent on conquest since 1812. We have this gigantic army, and a lot of it's overseas. I wasn't going to take into account the army that's here, because that is a legitimate function of government, I suppose. Protecting this from the foreign invasion that's not going to come, because no country on earth is capable of invading us. That's a different subject. We'll talk about that later. So, troops overseas. Now, some of the data, that I'm not satisfied with the data on that. I actually think that the data is incomplete, but I'm using the data that's available. If somebody wants to do better and join me in a partnership, or give me a grant of $50,000 to do this, we'll crunch the numbers. But I think the study is pretty freaking accurate. So let me go to the study, and again, this will be posted on Twitter and Facebook. By the way, the reason I do the walking podcast as opposed to sitting in a warm studio at home is I've done that, and I find that, not to go off on a tangent, but human beings, spent most of their history walking, and walking is so energizing. And I got the cold air in my face. I'm certainly not going to fall asleep from lack of sleep over the New Year's. I feel so energized when I'm outside, and I think it's more interesting to look at actual nature in the background as opposed to some phony AI-generated studio background. You're sitting on your butt reading a script. Do you see a script, ladies and gentlemen? In other words, I'm like when they taught us how to do moot court. They said, they don't want to hear. The judges don't want to see you reading anything. They want to see if there's anybody home behind those eyeballs. So I got no script. So apparently somebody's home. Apparently I do know what I'm talking about. I do need some notes for this, though. So that's why I do the walking podcast, even though it's a little bit inconvenient on a day like this. So let me get my notes, and we'll go through it. It's right here. In fact, I'll show it on the screen. Again, it'll be posted. And please share this. Now, I want to do I'm jumping around a little bit because I want to get these thoughts out, because I don't have a script. So I want this podcast to be widely viewed. I spent a lot of time on this. I was very disappointed last year. In fact, I almost wasn't going to do this again because I spent a lot of time on it last year. I thought it was a good idea, and nobody gave a shit. I said, I'm a stubborn P, and I wasn't going to give up. But I'm going to keep doing it because, frankly, it's a little bit of fun at the end of the year. It's not that hard to do once you have the formula set up and the sources set up. So I'm going to keep doing it, but it's really important to be able to evaluate this party called the Republican Party that claims our support and makes promises that it doesn't keep. So let's go through it. So spending went from $6.2 trillion in 24 to almost $6.9 trillion. So the score for that went from 20 to 22.16. 22.16. That's a big increase. Debt held by the public. And we know that the debt is exploding because these degenerate politicians have made a lot of promises they can't keep in order to get elected, so they don't have to go back and work on the farm or work in the factory or wherever. Or if they're Democrats, go back for the stupid law firm they used to work for. So they're borrowing money from our grandchildren to pay for their fucking programs like Ukraine and all this other bullshit. Debt held by the public. That's the real debt, not the phony debt, we borrowed from the Social Security Trust Fund. There is no fucking Social Security Trust Fund. Stop being cons. Stop being stupid, please. And no, I'm not drunk. I'm just feeling it right now. I was drunk last night. So that goes from 20, the baseline score, to 23.16. Isn't that beautiful? Simple battle plans are the best, folks. Simple battle plans are the best. Agencies, number of agencies went from 436 a year ago. Now we have 441. I don't even know what the hell they are, but there's 5 more agencies, all devoted to conspiring to deprive you of your life, liberty, and property, to paraphrase Mark Twain. That's an increase that goes from 20 to 20.23. Now let's go to federal employees, and naturally that went up. According to my calculation, there's 40,000. 40,000. If Lee had 40,000 extra troops, there'd be two countries right now. That's a lot of people at Gettysburg. So we went from 2,960,000 federal employees to 3 freaking million workers. So that goes from 20, the baseline, to 20.27. Troops overseas, this one I think is a little deceptive. It appears to have gone down, but I can hardly believe that, because we got troops in Ukraine. They're just not they're not being reported. We got troops all over Africa doing God knows what. So stupid. So stupid. Africa, of all places. We got to have troops in Africa. So last year, of course, and the numbers aren't good, and the time frame isn't good, but I'm doing the best I can. Nobody's doing anything better. So tell me who's got a better GOP scorecard. There's one in the freaking universe, mine. Troops overseas, active duty, 168,571 last year. Now, only number I could get was June, 165,830. So a slight decrease. I don't even believe that, but I'm not going to cook the numbers to achieve the result that I want. I don't even want a result. The result I want is, I wonder if the government got bigger or smaller, so I can either say the GOP is a fraud scheme, or they improved a little bit. I live here. I want them to improve. I want them to succeed. So, bottom line is, at the beginning of the year, totaling all the 5 factors, the score was 100. Obviously, by definition, you start at that baseline. What is it now? 105. Read it and weep. 105.49. 105.49. In other words, under Mike Johnson and Nick Langworthy and all these other Republicans, there's a couple good ones, Massey and so on. Not that many. You can count them on like two fingers and maybe 1 foot, your toes. Under all these people, your federal government got 5% bigger, almost 6% bigger, 5% bigger. So that's the GOP scorecard. Let's talk about, I got a little bit of time left. I got some energy. I'm not cold. Let's talk about what it all means. Here's what it means. The GOP is a fraud scheme. The Republican Party is a fraud scheme. It is one of the biggest fraud schemes in modern times. It's probably the biggest fraud scheme in the United States in the last, 75 years or so. Why do I say that? Because they, since the conservative movement, and that's another failure, conservative movement has failed. I documented that in Progressivism, a Primer. If you read my books, you'd already know a lot of this stuff. Conservative movement comes along in 64 and gets power sometime later with Reagan. Reagan took the White House, obviously, in 80, and they took the Senate. And you had a bunch of, what they call them, blue dog, red dog congressmen, whatever. The Democrats kept the House, but there were conservative Democrats at the time. There's almost none now. There's basically zero. So in the entire history of the conservative movement, and by the way, I knew Bill Buckley casually. He admired my work. Wish I'd gotten to know him better and worked with him more, but that's just the way things worked. I mentioned he called me Professor Ostrowski once on the show. So believe me, folks, I knew Milton Friedman. I admire Milton Friedman greatly. I'm just pointing out, I know what I'm talking about when I talk about the conservative movement, okay? I was there, first of all. I used to watch Firing Line in high school when everybody else was out doing whatever the fuck they were doing in high school. Conservative movement has failed, but my point is this, that for a very long time, the Republican Party has had a platform of making government smaller. And it has never done it. In fact, since 1913, the beginning of the progressive era, when a lot of bad programs started and then were followed up by other programs, later eras, FDR and so on, following the same small p, government's going to solve all your problems, progressive philosophy. The Republican Party has never repealed a single major big government progressive program. The GOP is a fraud scheme. I've been saying this for, starting in about 1980 when I joined the Libertarian Party out leaving the Democratic Party. I was never a Republican in those days. I'm not going to talk. I joined the party later, and that was all disappointing. We'll talk about that some other time. So, now, where does that leave MAGA? Because I'm sure people who are Trump people or MAGA people are saying, oh, no, he's wrong. We got to support the Republican Party because the bad old Democratic Party. This is the Karl Rove, Democratic boogeyman in the closet. You have to support the Republican Party no matter what, or we might elect a Democrat. Well, what does that mean? That means that you're giving an open invitation to the Republican Party to do absolutely none of what it says it's going to do because it knows it already bought you. It already has your vote because Karl Rove conned you into voting for them. But, Carter just died. Bill Clinton's still out there. In all honesty, the Carter and, I know I'm going to piss people off by talking about Carter, but the Carter and Clinton presidencies weren't really that bad. On the other hand, Bush's were terrible. And other Republican, let's leave it at the Bushes. The Bushes were terrible. So this notion that, you always have. I'm not defending whatever. I'm going off on a tangent. Let me get back to what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, MAGA is a separate political party. MAGA hasn't realized this yet, and apparently hardly anybody's realized it except me. But that's because I follow the mantra, I open my eyes and see what's in front of my face. MAGA is a separate political party from the Republican Party, and there's overt hostility between them. MAGA controls the White House, and the Republican Party controls the Congress. They control the governorships. They control the local, state legislative bodies, and they control the local party machines. So, I guess at this point, it's really up to MAGA to take the GOP scorecard and say, are we going to do anything better? Are we going to, there's an issue now. Let's talk about Mike Johnson because he's on the bubble, and I'm hoping that this GOP scorecard that proves statistically that his administration was a failure encourages people to vote against him, and we get a new speaker. So let's start right there. Is this just academic, or is he just whistling Dixie, or does this have? No, this is happening right now. I'm going to post this on Massey's site and on various Republican sites, and hopefully people will use the scorecard as ammunition to take out Mike Johnson. Because why not? Why not? So this is real. So as far as strategy for what do we do about all this? Well, let's try to wrap it up and talk a little bit about what all this means. And here I am at the same damn place. I always get off balance here. So what does all this mean? Well, it means that many things, but I'm going to wrap them all up here. First of all, read Progressivism, a Primer, because that book says that the ruling ideology of the United States since 1913 is progressivism. And most Republicans are progressives. They believe in big government in a variety of capacities. They might believe in a slightly smaller government than the Democrats, but they're still progressives. And until we eradicate the ideology of progressivism, how? Well, everybody reads my book and say, oh yeah, well, progressivism is stupid. It's a form of therapy. It has no rational basis, and we need to get rid of it. So you got to do that, and that you're not going to do that by voting. Voting is not really the problem. Voting is not really the solution because what we need is a new electorate. How do I vote for a new electorate? How do I vote for an electorate that doesn't love big government? That's my problem and your problem. But okay, so strategically, if you're either a libertarian or a fellow traveler, I assume you are if you're watching my program. What do we do? Well, I already know what to do. We pursue direct action. I'm trying to convince the Libertarian Party, with very little success so far, to switch to direct citizen action, which will actually solve these problems. I'm not going to go into that now. I've written 5 books on it. Almost every one of my podcasts talks about it. I'm not going to bore you with that. So, and that leaves, MAGA is opposed to the Republican Party. What does MAGA do? I gave a speech the other night when I got an award at the Constitutional Coalition. I said, well, these libertarians, they're not very good at politics, okay? The last time a libertarian won anything was Grover Cleveland's second term. We've been on the sidelines. I won't go into all the reasons why. It's a fact. We suck at politics. We suck at electoral politics. But you know what? We're really good at policy. We got the Austrian School of Economics backing us up. We have some of the best scholars throughout history. Bastiat, Jefferson himself in many ways. Murray Rothbard, my teacher, who taught me economics personally across the table at his private seminar. MAGA needs to look for friends in the libertarian camp. And so there's a fork and there's the libertarian. I'm gonna close on this and just reiterate what I've said in prior podcasts. And then at the end, I'm going to make a pitch for how you can help. And it's not sending me money. I don't ask for money, ever. You ever heard me ask for money? Nope, because I don't. MAGA needs to reach out to the libertarians, and that's one fork in the road. And libertarians need to reach out to MAGA. I've been pushing this for 8 years. It's beginning to happen. I wish I was more involved in making it happen, but I certainly helped a little bit, and I'm on record supporting it 8 years ago. And then the other fork in the road, again, Yogi Berra, when you have a fork in the road, you take it. We're taking this fork. We're going to work, libertarians are going to work with MAGA. Hopefully MAGA works with the libertarians because we have a common enemy, the Republican Party, which I've already proven through statistical logic is a fucking fraud scheme. So we take those forks in the road. One final point, I'm actually done, but look, let's do a little crowdsourcing. I don't have a PR firm. All you get here is original content that's not available anywhere else. I got to get a bigger platform, guys. I'm not getting any younger. I'm not going to be around forever. Got to get on the Bannon show. Somebody on this. I've been mentioned on the show, thanks to Naomi Wolf, but I've never been on the show. Somebody watching this podcast knows Bannon. That's all I ask. Put in a word, have Bannon do a quick 5-minute interview about the GOP scorecard. He'll get a kick out of it. He's a numbers guy. He was on Wall Street. And get me on that show for 5 minutes, and let's get this idea out there, because it's a way to prove in an elevator pitch that the GOP is a fraud scheme, and MAGA should realize it and separate itself, fight that opposing party, and join with the libertarians, because we can our combined efforts can make America great again. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great New Year. This was fun.